Hi, my name is Mariam Al-Khawaja. I'm the acting president for the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. I think that, when we're talking about whether we're seeing a decline or not in Europe, a lot of it is reflective of what's happening also in the Middle East and North Africa, of course, as you've already spoken about. Now, when we're talking about the collapse of the republics that were set up, as you said, from other countries and how the monarchies have survived. And I think it's very important to say here that it wasn't the collapse of democratic institutions within places like Egypt or Tunisia. It was actually oppressive regimes where people went to the streets and fought against them, and thus it was a good thing that they collapsed, not a bad thing. Whereas in the monarchies in the Gulf, what we're seeing is that because of Western support, they're actually able to survive protests that I personally took part in Bahrain. They're actually able to survive these protests and to continue to do business as usual with Western countries at a time when the West does claim that it supports human rights and democracy. And I think a lot of times what happens is that the West, in its claims that human rights and democracy matter, lose their footing and lose their platform by continuing to support governments like Saudi Arabia, like Bahrain, like the UAE, who continue to crack down on their people who are demanding change and basic reforms and basic human rights.
It's actually a very good point, and let me. So here we have some ministers of defense who clearly are traditionally concerned with strategic threats and have a kind of professional déformation professionnelle of hard, cold realpolitik, and we have some professional liberals almost and human rights activists who can be expected to speak up for values. What is the appropriate role if we are talking about the West both as an ideological and as a strategic conception? What is the proper balance between ideals and interests in Western policy?
Listen, it's not easy to be a full-time liberal these days. But the story is, in 1990s, we managed to convince ourselves that all good things go together. I don't know, have you seen this famous American blockbuster from the late 1990s, Air Force One? Great movie. American president kidnapped. He should choose whom to save, the country or the family. And he decided to save both. And I do believe this is the problem. Basically, for the whole 1990s, the idea was that we don't have tough choices to be made. And by the way, all these choices are never contextual. The idea is that democratization by rule produces pro-Western regimes and much more pro-liberal regimes. We know that that is not exactly always the case. When people are going to be empowered, they're going to make different choices, and some of the choices are the choices that we don't like. It's very difficult to say to the people, we're going to give you power under the conditions that you're not going to make wrong choices. And this is part of the problem, by the way, which we're facing in the Middle East. Secondly, of course, we have elections, but in some of these elections, the human rights are not basically also very much benefiting. And from this point of view, Turkey was a great example. You have free and fair elections, and you have people on the streets who are saying elections are not everything in a democracy. I do believe from this point of view, you cannot come simply with the principal solutions. You should be interested in context. And this is where I do believe that West failed. Because the controversial German thinker Carl Schmitt used to say something which I do believe is true. He said the problem with the victorious powers is that they're losing curiosity. You go there and you believe that you know the answers before the questions being asked. We didn't have a serious talk of what's happening on the Middle East. By the way, anytime we see 100,000 people on the street, we're calling this revolution. In 20th century, revolution, rebellion, revolt, insurgency, these were not synonymous. By the way, then, revolutions used to have political names. They could be communist, they could be fascist, they could be Islamic. Now they have company names. Facebook, Twitter, and so on. I'm saying this because I do believe we have this visualization of politics, which is becoming very difficult. You cannot make analysis simply watching television or basically going through the satellites and watching other things. And I do believe this lack of the social interest in the social and political dynamics of society is, which I do believe is part of the ungovernability that we are facing. And this is why I don't believe that you can simply say, we are going to support any time when people go on the street, or we are going to stay with the pro-Western regimes because we fear that others are coming. You should understand what this is about. And here I do believe that the expert community is not less to be blamed than political leaders. It's easy to blame political leaders, but I do believe that the expert community became less curious and intelligent than we should be.
I assume you agree with that.
First of all, I absolutely agree with Iran. And